In the year 1004, a Byzantine princess introduced a tool to Europe so scandalous, the Catholic Church called it the devil's instrument. That tool was the fork, and Europe rejected it for the next 500 years. This is the story of how the most common object on your dinner table was once considered a sin. It is a story of religion, of power, of shame, and of how one woman's death became a warning for an entire continent. To understand why the fork was hated, we first have to understand where it came from. Because the fork was not invented in Europe. It was invented in ancient China more than 5,000 years ago. Bronze forks have been unearthed from the Qijia culture of northwest China, dating back to 2200 BC. These were not primitive tools, they were elegant, ornate, used by royalty and nobility for generations. The Chinese eventually replaced forks with chopsticks, but the fork lived on elsewhere. Ancient Greeks used large two-pronged forks to serve meat at banquets. The Romans borrowed the design, refining it into smaller personal utensils made of bronze and silver. By the 4th century, the Byzantine Empire had turned the fork into an art form. In Persia, in Egypt, across the Islamic world, forks were everywhere. By the year 1000, most of the civilized world ate with forks, except Europe. In medieval Europe, the idea of using a metal tool to bring food to your mouth was considered strange, pretentious, even unnatural. Europeans ate with their hands, with knives, with wooden spoons. That was the way it had always been, and that was the way God intended it. Then came Theodora Dukaina, a Byzantine princess, educated, refined, raised in the great imperial palaces of Constantinople, where forks had been used for centuries. In 1004 AD, she traveled to Italy to marry Giovanni Orseolo, the son of the Doge of Venice. It was meant to be a political alliance, a union between the Byzantine East and the Christian West. Instead, it became a scandal that would shape European history for the next 500 years. At her wedding feast, Theodora arrived with an ornate golden case. Inside it was a small two-pronged instrument made of gold. She used it to lift pieces of food delicately to her mouth. The Venetian nobles stared in horror. Some whispered, some crossed themselves, and one of them, Cardinal Peter Damian, a powerful and feared figure in the Catholic Church, would make sure all of Europe heard about what he saw that night. In the months that followed, Damian wrote a scathing letter that would be copied, shared, and preached from pulpits across Italy. God, in his wisdom, has provided man with natural forks, his fingers. Therefore, it is an insult to God to substitute artificial metal forks for them when eating. To Damian, the fork was not a utensil, it was an act of vanity, a rejection of God's design. And when Theodora died of the plague just 2 years after her wedding, Damian declared it a sign from heaven. The Church officially called her death a punishment, divine retribution for the sin of eating with a fork. Europe remembered. For the next 500 years, the fork was treated as something close to witchcraft. Medieval Europeans continued to eat with their hands. Knights used daggers to cut meat. Peasants used wooden spoons for stew. Nobility passed communal bowls from person to person. Anyone who used a fork was mocked, gossiped about, sometimes reported to the church. Forks were called feminine, decadent, heretical, unnatural. A man caught using a fork could lose his reputation. A woman could be accused of vanity and pride, both considered deadly sins. Priests condemned forks in sermons. Monks refused to use them in monasteries. Even royalty avoided them in public. For 5 centuries, Europe held the line against this simple piece of metal. Meanwhile, the rest of the world kept eating with forks, as they always had. Then, in 1533, another Italian noblewoman changed history. Her name was Catherine de' Medici. She was 14 years old when she left Florence to marry the future King of France. Like Theodora 500 years before her, Catherine brought forks with her. She brought Italian chefs, Italian manners, and the Italian custom of individual place settings. The French court was scandalized. At first, they called her foreign, pretentious. Rumors spread that she practiced witchcraft, partly because of the strange tools she ate with. But Catherine was relentless. She held Italian-style dinners. She demanded her children use forks. She insisted the court adopt her customs. Slowly, decade by decade, the fork crept into French dining rooms. By the mid-1600s, King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, declared the fork a mark of nobility. What had been the devil's tool became the symbol of aristocratic refinement. From France, the fork spread to England, to Germany, to the Americas. By the 1700s, every royal court in Europe had surrendered. Silversmiths built entire careers crafting ornate forks for the wealthy. By the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution made forks cheap enough for common households. What had taken thousands of years everywhere else in the world took Europe 700 years to accept. And yet today, it sits on your dinner table like it was always there. The fork you use tonight to eat your meal was once called the devil's instrument by the most powerful institution in the Western world. A princess died because of it. An entire continent spent 500 years pretending it did not exist. History is stranger than you think. Sometimes the most ordinary objects carry the darkest stories. If you learned something today, subscribe for more strange history you were never taught in school. Thanks for watching.